Hello, everyone, and welcome. I see that we have participants from all over Milwaukee, Chicago, Atlanta, Bermuda. This is beautiful. So thank you so much for joining us today for the conversation. We have so much to cover in such a little amount of time. So we are going to jump right in. And I, again, just want to emphasize, if you have questions, throw those in the Q&A. And we love to see your comments as we go. And we will give you an opportunity near the end to ask your questions or to acknowledge some of those questions. I know that there are going to be a lot, so we will do our best. I want to go ahead and introduce each of our panelists today. And first, before I start, though, I must acknowledge Bell Hooks. And the reason why I must acknowledge Bell Hooks is because she just passed away today. She is a Black woman. She's an activist, a writer, an author, a speaker, and I had the honor and privilege to hear her speak in Milwaukee about a decade ago. And I just want to read a quote from her to get us started. Sometimes people try to destroy you precisely because they recognize your power, not because they don't see it, but because they see it and they don't want it to exist. And I think each one of us here on this panel today, and maybe many of you, can identify with exactly what this quote is saying. So just wanted to acknowledge Bell Hooks and the work that she's done and that she's contributed, and rest in power, Bell Hooks. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists here. First and foremost, we have Dr. Sakina Gordon-Jones. Sakina is the Chief Coaching Officer for Transformation Edge Coaching and Consulting, an organization that helps leaders and organizations create a thriving work environment with improved and sustainable bottom line results. A leader in the coaching field, Sakina holds the Master Certified Coach credential from ICF. Luana Harris is a certified diversity executive, an ICF credentialed coach, and a global leadership development professional who has over 20 years of experience in large multinational pharmaceutical companies. Her most recent book, Diversity Beyond Lip Service, a coaching guide for challenging bias, introduces an inside-out approach for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and is the foundation of her coaching paradigm. Dion Mack, a seasoned executive and HR practitioner, has dedicated most of her career to creating inclusive and diverse workspaces within large and complex, highly regulated multinational corporations. In addition to her coaching and consulting practice, Dion currently serves as the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at the Institute for Professional Excellence in Coaching. And then finally, myself, I am the Institute of Coaching's, here I'm stuttering when I talk about myself, the Institute of Coaching's most recent Director of Education. I just joined the Institute as Director of Education this summer. I've been a member for several years, and I also have a coach training academy, and I am a college professor, and so I engage in teaching research and producing research, as well as the practice of coaching. So that is who I am. So we're going to go ahead and jump into our first question. And really, I want this to be a conversation and a dialogue. So every question doesn't necessarily have to be answered by all of us, but this first one should be. So, and this is really to give everybody a sense of the journey and how we came to where we are today. So the first question is, if you can please tell us about your journey into the field of coaching and how you landed where you are today. And I'm going to start with Sakina, since she's the first one that shows up on my on my screen.
Wow, it's a question that I think about so often because there wasn't a path, there wasn't a career path right towards coaching at any point. But I remember very distinctly what happened to me in this journey. And so I spent most of my early career as a consultant, and I eventually was a management consultant. In fact, my title was strategic advisor. And I worked with leaders as they were trying to, do mergers and acquisitions, transform their business, et cetera. And I just finished working with a leader who had just grown her business, and it just became so huge. I think she had 9 business units reporting up to her. And we put together this massive strategy. And everybody was excited about it. I mean, we did it in a way, in fact, I don't know how many of you know balanced scorecard approach, but we did it in a way that strategy went all the way down to the front line, and they were all excited. And a couple of weeks out after that, she called me into her office and she's like, it's not going to work. And I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, there's a problem. It's not going to work. And I finally got her to breathe and like, okay, so what is the problem? She says, me. I'm the problem. I think I'm going to get in the way. I don't know how to lead at this level. Can you work with me one-on-one? And I said, as any consultant knows, you say yes, right? So I said yes. But I didn't know what I was going to do differently with her than I was doing already. And so I went to lunch with a colleague of mine and I was sharing this. And my colleague said, well, maybe you're going to coach. And there was a silent moment because until that day, I did not remember hearing that word coach in that context. And that was in 2003. So I fast forward, I'm looking for, let's find out more about this thing called coaching. And there happened to be in DC a conference a couple of weeks out that was going to happen. And I signed up for it. And a friend of mine, we drove up and we're in this ballroom, the Marriott Bethesda, and it's full. It's full. There are all of these people that are coaching. And I thought, where did they come from? And how did I not know that this was happening? Anyway, it was a 2-day conference. The second day, they said, is there anyone in the room that has never coached before, never been coached? And so I raised my hand as well as some other people in the room. And it says, we don't want you to leave without an experience. And so I was blessed to have 30 minutes with a professional coach who looked like me, sat at a round table, and everything shifted for me in 30 minutes. It was one of the most powerful interactions in my professional career to date. And I remember saying to her, I want to be a part of this. And so, long story, to make my story a little shorter, I went back. We started doing some ad hoc coaching. My position changed. I became global head of leadership development. And we built an internal coaching program because we realized that leaders needed support, not just training, but they actually needed support to see themselves, to shift, and to be able to lead effectively. And I fell in love with doing that so much that I didn't even want to lead anymore. And so ultimately, I resigned my position so I could do it full time and ended up on the training track. And so I became an educator of coaching, really first teaching people how to do internal coaching and how to build that within their organizations. And then I ended up becoming the director of the whole program. And so today I lead Transformation Business Coach Institute, where we coach, whether you're inside an organization or you're trying to build internal capacity to coach, or external and you're wanting to go into a coaching practice of your own. So that's my journey. It's been lovely. I found flow in coaching in my career.
I love that. Thank you so much. And I have to highlight one of the things that one of our commenters, Sophia Casey, just said, quote unquote, someone who looks like me. And I think that is so key. That's one of the reasons why we're having this conversation today, so that people can identify with a wide range of coaches from a variety of backgrounds. And today is one example of how powerful that can be. Thank you. I'm going to jump to Lawana. You're muted still.
Yeah, so thank you so much. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to share today. And I would say my journey really started in trying to find a way to help based on some stories and a series of stories that I was hearing as a business leader. I spent my entire corporate career with big pharma companies, J&J, and then a French-owned pharmaceutical company, Sanofi, and stories that I would hear, whether it was being a business leader or as a mentor, in certain instances as a sponsor, I kept hearing stories of individuals that needed help, but they weren't really able to get the help that they wanted in the way that they needed the help. And so I also would hear, because I work with our ERGs, employee resource groups, I would have individuals that would say, hey, I was told that I could talk to you. Similar to what Sakina said, individuals were looking to be able to talk to someone that looked like them, to share some of their experiences. So it started organically, honestly, with just having coaching conversations. And I remember hearing individuals say, thank you, I appreciate having an opportunity. And, I received some compliments as a coach, and I thought, well, wait a minute, I'm not actually a coach. We're just having a conversation. And so that piqued my interest, because the types of conversations and seeing individuals say that it was helping, even some who had, had a series of conversations, but felt that their voice was being muted or they weren't really heard or understood. And so our company built an internal cadre of coaches and began to fill that need. And yet I still continued to hear from people of color specifically that they didn't feel that they were getting what they needed. And honestly, in some cases, they were experiencing harm during coaching interactions. And so I wanted to figure out what, if anything, can be done to help in that specific area. And at the time, I was the director of global leadership development and began to do some work internally, looking at some empirical data. And then at a couple years ago, decided to take some of the work externally so that I could focus specifically on bringing help and coaching to people of color. And so that's when I wrote the book, Diversity Beyond Lip Service, a coaching guide for challenging bias, because I wanted to introduce work specifically at the intersection of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, justice, psychological safety, belonging, all those things, and professional coaching. And how do we not only help coaches, and that's why I'm so grateful for the opportunity to partner with Sakina to actually train coach educators with the Inclusion Coach program, certification program, and really looking at bringing coaching skills to leaders so that they can also have coaching conversations. And so it's been great over the last couple of years working with large and small organizations to not only help leaders, but in one large tech company, we're actually training all of the HRBPs. And they actually have a position called diversity business partner. So we're training all of them to also have coaching conversations. And so even looking at the skills being embedded as an internal capacity, whether it be an internal cadre of coaches or partnerships with external coaches, then also looking at leaders. So I'm really glad to see organizations taking on a coaching culture. But for me, it all started with hearing the stories of so many people and trying to figure out, how do we help? Because we can't, hear these stories. And, I'm a person, I'm an empath, so I carry that with me. And so coaching was a way that I saw was actually bringing about some meaningful change. And so now, as my husband said, I joined the coaching cult. That's what he calls it, because I never take my coaching hat off.
I love it. I love it. I had a family member just ask me this weekend, so I need the friend Pam and not the coaching Pam in this moment. Can we, switch gears? So yeah, I get it. But thank you so much, Luana, and for your contribution with your book. I mean, it is a much needed resource in this industry, as you know. I was searching high and low for research on this subject area, or for a resource on this subject area. And so can't tell you how grateful I am for your book and the fact that it's just amazing. I love the framework. So again, if you all definitely check out that book. And then the coach training program that both she and Sakina have, if I'm saying this incorrectly, but let me know, but they've collaborated on to integrate the content of the book. So So thank you. And then finally, we have Dion Mack, who just so happens to be a neighbor of mine that we discovered in this journey of creating this webinar.
So, well, first, absolutely want to plug again to your point, Pamela. Luana's book, amazing. It's 340 folks in here. If you don't have the book, absolutely get it if you're a coach. But my journey into this space, I think just like Sakina mentioned and Luana, it wasn't like a natural path. I just kind of landed there, and I honestly think it was divine. But from how I entered into the DEI space overall to landing at IPAC, short story, or I guess the short version of it, I've been doing D&I work for the last 25 years. And as I grew in responsibility, starting out first as an entry-level practitioner who's executing on strategy, and then moving up to the point where I'm leading the teams that were designing strategy, I found that I was working much more closely with leaders and the executive teams on how they personally show up as inclusive leaders. And some of the organizations I worked with, specifically when I was at Lockheed, we had developed some internal coaching programs and started to work doing some internal coaching. And I realized that I really enjoyed doing that. So in March of 2020, I said, let me get some formal training in this space. And I enrolled at IPAC. Then in May of 2020, George Floyd was murdered and the world erupted. And I did a little bit of consulting with the CEO at IPAC. And I remember in one of our early conversations, I was talking to her about, all that it would entail in helping to bring the organization to intentionality around D&I. And like, it's not just doing a statement, or it's not just, impacting the curriculum, but it's looking at your organization, I guess at the time, as an employer, what kind of a culture do you have internally? What's the experience of your employees? Absolutely looking at the curriculum and thinking about how do we train up culturally responsive coaches, but then looking at the industry and looking at the community and all these things. And, it was kind of eye-opening, I think, in that conversation with her around, oh, there's a lot that goes into this. And I was like, yeah, I would love to be the chief diversity officer at IPEC one day. And I just kind of said it loosely. This was like May of 2020. And then she called me in January of 21 and was like, remember that conversation we had months ago? It's like, yeah. She's like, are you ready? And I'm like, okay. And, and that's what brought me here.
I love it.
I'm part of the neophyte out of this group, right, in the actual coaching space, but I've been doing the DEI work for a long time.
I love it. I love it. And your track record brings credibility to, to your work with IPAC as Chief Diversity Officer, as well as to the work that you're doing in coaching. So, and I think that's a lot of the case for a lot of us. We bring in what we've experienced into the coaching experience. And I will just say that the way that I was brought into coaching was it's very different from all three of you. We all have different paths. And mine was from the academic world. I started off as a college professor and realized very quickly I was a professor of research, and realized very quickly that students are coming to my office about non-academic concerns. My husband is cheating on me. My kids are, driving me crazy. I had a parent that passed away. I had, we just went bankrupt. I mean, all kinds of reasons that were really making it difficult to get through the dissertation process. And so I went to my department chair, and said, look, I think I need life coach training. And for me, it was life coach training at the time. And it was, because I need to be able to better serve these students. And she agreed wholeheartedly and allowed that to be my professional development for the year, to go get trained. And it was life-changing for me in terms of the trajectory of my career. I was not necessarily thoroughly impressed with the training that I received, and I'll leave it at that. But I really believe that there's more to it, that it can be more transformational, that it can be a more enriching experience, and not just a certificate meal, So I then, a year later, decided to start my own coaching school, the Academy of Creative Coaching. And from the very beginning, day one of our curriculum, integrating cultural competence, bias, and all of those elements. But we didn't have a resource. We didn't have Luana's book. But we used what we could. We pulled together the research and we pulled together a curriculum. But that has been a commitment, from day one in my work. Whether it's through the coaching school or through my work here at IOC. And so I came to it from an academic angle, but I very much also, I definitely do much more than life coaching, which is, there's nothing wrong with life coaching, but I definitely work more on the corporate executive business side of things at this stage of my career. So that's all of us, and this is all how we got here. I love your comments that are coming in here. I do see some of your questions, so we're going to go ahead and dive into. And you all don't need to answer this one, but we can maybe get a couple of you who might want to speak to why this topic of women in leadership and coaching is important. Why does it matter? Why is this something that, you know, you're here at the table to discuss today? Should I call on someone? Go ahead, Dr. Sakina.
Well, I mean, I'll start it off, but
Sure.
you know, I think we're right in the middle of, as Dion was talking, you know, an opportune time, I should say, where we're looking at diversity out of the diverse lens, right? And it's an opportunity, I think, for us to look at the inequities that have continued to exist. And hopefully, as you mentioned earlier, coaching is new, right? In the sense of many of the professions that have been going on for hundreds of years. Before we get to a place where systemically there's a plague, you know, in coaching, I think this is an opportunity for us to really begin to create the pathway so that women don't become a secondary. I think we've already done that to a large degree if I look at the coaching profession, but we also have to carry that banner because we are coaching, most of us, right? We're coaching in organizations, whether they are Fortune 100 or, you know, nonprofit or government entities, where we're coming face to face with the inequity there. And I think we get an opportunity to show up and represent that, as well as to facilitate, right, what needs to happen there. So
yeah, thank you. And I want to acknowledge one of the comments. Patricia Houston also answered this question. She said, because a lot of people are seeking us out. And it's necessary for us to be able to handle, you know, these opportunities as they come up. I'll give you a little background about why this question even came up for me. I was reading an article about how, it was a comparative article about how the president of New Zealand was handling COVID versus, you know, and other women in leadership versus the way men in leadership were, you know, addressing COVID. And it wasn't necessarily to say women are better. It was more so to say, look at the difference in approach. And I got involved, admittedly, in a little bit of a social media debate with the gentleman who said, I don't understand the point of emphasizing that she's a woman. She's a leader. That's all that matters. Who cares that she's a woman? And, you know, I thought that's a great question to pose to the panel. You know, why does it matter that we're women? And so if we'll maybe take one more answer before we move on. Does anybody else have?
Yeah. I'll add to that, Pamela, but I think you're hitting right on that. It's representation does matter, and the world is comprised of different people, different genders, different experiences, different thought processes and ways of thinking. And it's that collective intelligence from those different experiences that we need in order to realize the greatest possibilities, whether it's in coaching or any industry. If you don't have those varied experiences and those varied thought processes, the innovation is not going to come. That different way of handling COVID is not going to show up if you didn't necessarily have that woman who just thought to approach it differently there. So when they say representation matters, I think that's the reason why. It's that diversity of thought and that collective intelligence from those differences.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, absolutely. And I see that Luana added a link in the comments as a resource addressing exactly this. So thank you so much, Luana. So from your vantage point, what stands out to you as a compelling need in the coaching industry as it pertains to diversity, inclusion, and belonging? People are paying attention now. George Floyd happened. Unfortunately, George Floyd was not the first, but in light of everything that happened, it was the perfect storm in terms of oh, now we want to pay attention. So now we have organizations, leaders paying attention and wanting to address this concern around diversity. And so now that we're positioned to be heard in a different way, what stands out to each of you as it pertains to, what the compelling needs are as it pertains to diversity, inclusion, and belonging?
Well, I'll say, as with, I think this is relevant in healthcare and other well-being industries too. I think ensuring that you have, in this instance, coaches that are culturally responsive and aware is important. Having an awareness of how difference, and particularly how marginalization because of those differences, can impact our clients, how it may show up in the coaching relationship, how it may impact our own personal biases. That awareness to me is critical. And coaches that have not explored, how bias may impact their clients, the industry, or themselves, that can be problematic. I don't think that we're certainly not doctors. Well, some of you are, but I believe that there is still an obligation to do no harm. And I don't know if we can ensure that if there's an ignorance to the experience of others or ignorance of our own blind spots.
Yeah. Oh, those blind spots. They can do such damage. Go ahead, Luana.
Well, here's the thing. I think, first of all, a lot of the work immediately following those events was how to help. And, we're having a real conversation here today, right? How to help white people talk about race. Mm-hmm. That was what I was getting calls for and about. And I said, well, I want to know what your long-term strategy is and how do you actually look to embed behavioral change? Right. And that opened up the conversation to coaching. And therefore, I was hearing individuals who were either having coaching during that time. And when I say individuals, again, I offer services to everyone, and my specialty area is working with people of color. Mm-hmm. And so as in working with organizations and people of color within organizations, I would hear that individuals were having coaching and experiencing harm during the coaching sessions. So they were there and, thinking, okay, here's a point during this, air quote, great awakening. And, I have to say this or put it in there. People say great awakening, but the thing is, that alarm bell has been ringing since 1619. It's just people been hitting snooze. So it's really not an awakening, but just wanted to put that point of clarification there. However, with individuals experiencing harm, then there was a need to say, if we look at our current dynamics, no finger pointing, no blame, no shame at all, just looking at where we are, the predominance of white coaches in the industry trying to help people of color through racialized trauma, there was a lot of bumps along the way, a lot on both ends, right? You had individuals who were pouring their hearts out and sharing at a very vulnerable level and being met with things like a greater need for emotional intelligence or a greater need for being a team player. And it's individuals who were in between meetings going in the bathroom stall and bawling their eyes out. Yes. And not able to focus. And so even bringing that sense of awareness that the need to do more than just hold space, but actually connect with our clients and understand that while I may not ever experience racialized trauma, I need to at least develop a trauma-informed lens through which I can serve my clients. And so I'm excited that some, not all, but some organizations are ready to have conversations on that level, even trying to understand what trauma-informed coaching is and having a true, genuine, and authentic trauma-informed lens. And on that end, I also just want to throw in there real quickly, a lot of people jumped on the boat. Similar to what you said, I saw diversity and inclusion coaches just pop up on LinkedIn. It was like there was a something evangelist trending before. Everything was some kind of evangelist. Mm-hmm. And so that started to happen with the coaching piece. And I'll be honest, maybe some of them on the line, call me out, but individuals were calling me from large organizations, coaching organizations, and saying, we're looking to bring in a diversity and inclusion coach competency into our organization. And they have hundreds, some even thousands of coaches. But, honestly, some of the conversation was superficial.
Yeah.
And so unless we're really willing to do that deep work, this is what this is, we can't sprinkle on a couple definitions and, just barely dip our toe in the water and go out and hold space and really serve our clients for these deep visceral level needs. And I'll get off my soapbox on that, but that's just been my experience.
I don't think anybody wants you to get off that soapbox. This is truth telling, important realities here that we're working with. And in that vein, you mentioned that there's some people are, during the break, they're in the bathroom, they're crying, and I know that from the perspective of being a Black woman, I'm at the forefront of this sometimes, whether I want to be or not, whether I'm in the mood or not. There's certain things that are said sometimes that I can't just let slide because it hits to the very heart of who I am. So there may be moments like that. There may be moments after we see a verdict on TV and I don't want to get on Zoom today. I don't want to talk to anybody today. So my question is, based on the different types of backlash that we've seen happen, in society, as well as some of the, I guess, going against the grain that we are sometimes required to do if we want to be, on the forefront of this. Sometimes we want to be, sometimes we don't. But how do you manage to care for yourself and get the job done, in light of experiences like gaslighting and microaggressions and the denial that this is even an issue? Yeah, big sigh.
Yeah. So I'll say this, while I'm relatively new to coaching, I've been doing the DEI work for a long time. And so I would say this backlash is not anything new, right? It's cyclical. Every couple of years, something happens. And then DEI becomes the buzzword. And you get this swell of folks who want to become DEI practitioners and now DEI coaches. And then you have a faction of the world who's like staunch opponents to it. And the gaslighting and the microaggressions, to me, it's just something that's always been there. It's kind of always going to be there. So I just kind of stay armored up, if you will, around it. But, and I'd say the microaggressions and the gaslighting, to me, it is really just indicative of where people are, or a byproduct of where individuals are. And so I've learned to not take that personally, meet people where they are, and above all, just be true, honest, and authentic to myself. So, I look at what it is that I'm trying to accomplish and the impact that I'm trying to make. And I'll say, really be real with yourself around that part. What is it that you're actually trying to accomplish in your work as a coach, or as a DEI practitioner, or as a DEI coach? Really be real with yourself and with others about what you're trying to accomplish, and just be true to that. And I found that the rest falls into place. Now, I will say, being in the environment that I'm in now, it's refreshing because I feel a lot more liberated than I did in other more conservative corporate environments. But you still run into the same things, for sure. Just be you. And do you, and be authentic, and meet folks where they are.
Yeah.
I will echo what Dion just ended with. And almost I want to try to link the question that you asked before to this one. In addition to everything that my sister Luana shared, I want to say that we also have to create more access to coaching. I think that is an imperative. And I think for many of the years that coaching has been a profession, it has been an exclusive profession, right? If you look at the demographics, at least the demographics that we have from an ICF perspective, the majority of coaches are not of color. Certainly not the ones that are ICF member or credentialed coaches. And the people that access coaching are also very limited in terms of color. when we bring coaching into an organization, it typically goes to the C-suite, the executives. And again, that is not a diverse population. So for me, one of the imperatives that needs to happen, compelling, is that we need to create access to coaching. If coaching is integral to a thriving society, which is what we say at ICF, then we need to make sure that every part of our society thrives, not a special part of our society. So to me, that has to happen.
That
And
was powerful.
For me, in terms of dealing with the backlash, it's really, again, something that Dion said, which is it's personal and yet it's not, right?
Yeah.
It's bigger than me. It's bigger than us. And so I think when we realize that, I feel this time is a time for us to, hold up the banner, right? Because those before us have done it and it's our turn. And this is one of those ways in which we do it, which is to be able to speak truth. And as one of my colleagues told me, since I don't have a problem speaking truth, but she said, Sakina, but remember, speak truth in love. So I think this is what we get a chance to do, right? And to do that well and to do it consistently, because we do have to have self-care. But what I have learned is to not just have self-care, but have self-regard.
Yes.
Self-regard. So know yourself. Appreciate yourself.
Yes.
Right? Appreciate your culture. And that will, to me, give you the ability to see others and be able to stand in this space and speak truth in love.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. I want to circle back to a question that I've seen asked a few times in the chat, even though it should be in the Q&A, but I can't ignore it. A couple of people, and this is to what you were saying, Luana, about trauma-informed coaching. I believe also that is a very important component to integrate, especially if you're dealing with diversity and inclusion in light of everything that's happening today. People are not in a vacuum. We are experiencing a whole life, and it is also a really important part of my curriculum. What do you say to people, because a few people have raised concerns justifiably about whether or not coaches should be addressing and dealing with trauma?
Right. Well, I don't know. If you're dealing with Black people, Black and brown people, people of color, you're dealing with trauma. The question is, are you going to support or refer? And we all have an opportunity to say, if you're having conversations with people of color today in 2021, trauma is on the agenda. It's just a matter of what to do about it.
Yeah.
And I get it. We haven't talked about it. Well, let me go back and make a disclaimer statement here. I love to get into good trouble. So let me just give that disclaimer statement, right? That's the fine print. I love to get into good trouble. So let me just tell you that first. Next, let me tell you, I hit a milestone birthday, and that milestone birthday kicked me over that hump of trying to assimilate. I'm ready to do me and all that it means until I leave and try to help as many people as I can. So with those disclaimers, I want to go ahead and say at this point, we're looking at evidence-based practices for coaching, and we're also looking at not necessarily just 100% looking at the way that things have always been done, because we're not living in times like any other time, right?
Right.
And so because of that, I'm more than willing to take a look at how can we redefine and reimagine how to be in best service of our clients. And we are not therapists. No, not at all. That said, though, it doesn't matter to me, personal opinion, N of one, if we're talking about trauma-informed lenses or if we're talking about marital issues. There may come a point where we reach the end of our coaching agency and the ability to support a client. When we reach that edge, we refer. Simple. It's no different with trauma-informed lenses, because when we're on the client's agenda, I can't tell you a client of color, and it doesn't matter at what level in the organization, CEO to entry-level employee, that is not walking into a coaching session with some level of trauma. Now, I don't want to make a gross sweeping generalization. I'm just saying it's already there. It's just that we're not necessarily trained or have had the capacity and even the mindset to support in those areas. So that's what I would say. Refer when we get to the end of our agency, and our own resourcefulness, self-manage and understand when and where and how. We may not be the right coach for someone who's coming in and saying, I'm experiencing levels of depression and anxiety that are spiraling out of control. I just got a new role. I transferred into greater responsibility as a VP, and I'm trying to hold it together. I'm the only woman of color at my level, yet every day I can barely make it until the end of the day.
Yes.
Not everyone may be able to hold that space, and that's okay. And if we need to refer. But I don't think we should back away from that conversation and serving in that capacity, if we're willing to do the work to understand that, sure, I can navigate this space, and when I get to my edge, then I'll refer. And when you talk about even making the need aware, making the invisible visible, sometimes when we're working through HR departments, they're like, well, my managers or my leaders aren't requesting coaching. Okay, what are they requesting? And a coaching conversation and applying the principles and tenets of coaching can be done in any conversation. So while they may go into a formal coaching relationship, they may come in and have some things that the HRBPs and other HR personnel who are trying to support them through them, if they were equipped with basic understanding of how to help them tap in and go deeper within themselves to get the answers they need, versus looking at, okay, I've seen this before. You're just stressed out. Take some time off. Here, you can call the EAP program. Maybe they just need someone who can help them with some empathetic listening and curiosity to get to that point. And a whopping, I'm from the South, y'all. So a whopping dose of humility and cultural competence to say, how do we explore this at a level where we can bring some healing and restorative practices right here, right now, you know, right? So that's what I say. Yes, there are boundaries, absolutely. And there are ways to navigate this professionally with ethics and in service of our clients.
Yes.
Ask me how I know, and I'll tell you sometime, but that's another conversation.
I just want to add one quick thing. I know we're short on time to what Luana said, particularly as it relates to recognizing that if you are with a client that's Black or brown, you're dealing with racial trauma regardless. I would also say that, and I'll keep it to the United States, but I do believe that it's global. Even if you're not Black and brown, recognizing that you are dealing with racialized trauma, because it's not just those who've been impacted by oppression, who've been oppressed, that have that trauma. In order for you to be part of the group that's doing the oppressing, there's trauma that comes with that too. You're just not aware of it because that's the water that you swim in. And so that's why it's important to do that personal exploration of how has marginalization, how has oppression, how has racism, how has bias impacted me in order to be a more effective coach, without regard to what my clients look like.
Right. You know, one of the studies within the Institute of Coaching, we have the Race, Ethnicity, and Inclusion Council. And one of the studies that we're looking at, that we're developing right now and writing a lit review around, is the racial trauma, and the fact that racial trauma manifests itself in a number of different ways, whether it is a denial, nope, I haven't been traumatized, whether it is a reproduction, so I'm going to do to you what was done to me, and then there's several other ways that manifests. And I think what's important for us as coaches is that not that we're, and I think there's a difference between trauma coaching and trauma informed coaching, which is what Luana very clearly stated. Trauma informed coaching means that we understand what trauma looks like so that we can, I want to say call it out. That might not be everybody's coaching style, but so that we can address it, as it presents itself. If we have no idea what it looks like, we are not effectively helping our clients. So I'm echoing what both of you are saying, and I appreciate it. And I know we have to move. I'm going to keep moving forward.
Hey, Pamela, before
sure,
you move
sure.
on, I want to just add this in just from an educator lens here, because I think that what we're trying to say is that we as coaches have to develop ourselves to be able to create the space for our clients with whatever that may be that they are bringing or presenting, or may not even be able to articulate the way Luana articulated that this is what's happening to me. So if we don't prepare ourselves, what's going to happen is we will shut them down before they can even open themselves up to true coaching. And that would be a disservice to our profession as coaches. So we have to prepare ourselves. We have to do the work ourselves. We have to ensure that we are embodying the kind of mindset that allows for what is a person's truth to step into the room with us and not to shun it into a should. You should be able to move up. You should speak up. Well, they may not be able to. And how do we create the space for that to be what comes into the room? Yeah,
thank you. So we've had several questions from the participants around cultural competence. So I would like to kind of open that conversation up a bit. And how, in what ways can cultural competency be effectively integrated in the coaching relationship? And we had somebody ask about cultural competency as it pertains to people of color, BIPOC people being the coaches, but also, coaching around the different concerns, that communities of color may experience. So I guess the bigger question, and just trying to summarize what I'm seeing around cultural competency, what are some of the tools or some of the things that we can do for those listeners or viewers who are very practical, that might be helpful in terms of instilling, if that's the best word, cultural competence into our clients? And I don't like the way I worded that, but that's, how can we help people grow in that area?
I'll give someone a chance as well. One way I think is identity work. I found to be a really great avenue in having some exploration. And I see Sakari in the chat, so I'll shout out to her for some of the great work that she's doing up at Georgetown relative to identity. And then also looking at people for who they are, right? We say coachees, and I get that. That's a part of our relationship, but it's a relationship with people. And so when we understand that we are all multifaceted individuals, and we cannot come into a coach, just like we can as coaches. I can't watch what's been happening around me in society and go into my coaching call and click the switch and leave all of that behind. All of that comes with me.
Right.
And so I can't compartmentalize my life. I can't compartmentalize who I am, my care, concern, all those things. And neither can our coachees. And so they're bringing that in with them. So as we think about cultural competence, I think one very practical step we can do is to invite that into this space. So we're all very clear and comfortable with inviting and naming what's present and opening up a space to say, let's center ourselves, that we all have practices of how we get to the point of where we're really ready to have the conversation. And even in that space of exploration and discovery, we can invite into that space identity. We can invite all of who you are into this space. And sometimes just by opening that up, okay, I'm getting some goosebumps. I feel you through the chat there. So even in opening up some of that, just to give people space just to be, then some of the things that we think, oh, we're trying to force diversity and inclusion into a conversation. No, it's just that we don't necessarily open up the space for cultural exploration, humility, competence, curiosity. That's not something that we have typically done. And so when we do that, I think we'll be, yes, in service of our client, but we'll also see that there are some conversations that just weren't happening because folks didn't think that this was the place that it could.
That's great.
You know, I want to, if it's okay, I want to just sort of bring this to a bigger space, because this idea of cultural competence, I think, is huge for all of us as coaches. And in fact, I don't think that we can do diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, or belonging without cultural competence. It's almost like the precursor, right? So I think that we need to also allow our minds to go to a place that culture is bigger even than the race, and it's huge. And because we coach across the globe, we train coaches across the globe, to remember that this shows up in so many ways, that what Luan is saying is true. We have to make room for it to show up, and we have to be open to it. And it may show up, it may be that we're really great with people of color, but not so great with some other aspect of that person's identity. All of it matters. So we have to be the kind of coaches that can make room for whatever needs to show up from that person. And we need to realize that even if that person that you're coaching does look like you, they are not you, right? And that means they have some things that may be very different than you, and you have to be okay with that. So we have to manage ourselves, prepare ourselves, do the work ourselves, so we can hold that space for all of this to show up, whoever that person is, in all of their ways. But realize, if we do diversity and equity without culture, then we are doing it lip service. There is no way to do that without saying, I need to understand your context and coach you based on your context, not mine.
And that's actually what we call identity informed coaching. And because it's like, we need to understand, your identity needs to inform this process. Who are you? And genuinely get to know who that person is. I want to throw out one more question from the group before I ask you all the final question, and I hope we can squeeze this in. But I think it's an important question that somebody asked, Nicole Owen asked. What are some of the common coaching concepts that can actually be harmful?
Well, I'll say this quickly, right? I know one thing that coaches will often do. You come to them with a scenario. Maybe you come in, you're saying, I think I'm being treated differently at work because I am, name it, a woman. And, the first thing we want to say is, well, how else could you think about that? What is another way for you to, process that? Is there something else that could be going on here? As if this person hasn't taken time to really think about what they're experiencing. And, I know you think it might be discrimination, but maybe it's something else. And that might be true, right? That absolutely could be true. But in that moment, what they don't need is for you to dismiss their experience.
Right.
And for them to feel like, they probably have not thought this through. How about do a little bit of acknowledging and validating of their experience first, right? And get them to a place where they can say, all right, well, maybe I can look at this differently. And maybe it was discrimination, right? And discrimination is something that's going to happen. That is part of the water that we swim in. But I can't control that, but I need to figure out what can I do to deal with that. But in that initial moment, what they don't need is, well, maybe you should think about that differently.
That is a good one. That is a good one. And it's resonating with the comments. People are saying, yep, I've had that. I've experienced that. That's a big problem. And in the comments also are some answers to that question. So I appreciate those of you who are throwing out other, things that are harmful in the coaching experience. Is it safe for me to jump to the last question, or do either of you have anything else to add to that question?
I'm just +1ing Dion, +1.
Okay. So the final question is, what's next on the agenda for you? What initiatives are on the horizon for you with your work in coaching?
Let me just dive in here because I really am looking forward to 22. And the reason is ICF has started some deep work in terms of understanding DEI, and we haven't gotten much off the ground because we don't even have good data yet. But what we have done is say, we need to actually do this work, right? And in order to do this work, we have to put attention on it, and we have to give it attention.
Yeah.
And so ICF has already moved forward in making sure that there's going to be a person that has some oversight of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, and not just for, you know, the staff, but for this profession, right? So that is going to be huge. And our goal is to think about how do we embed what we're talking about into the ecosystem of coaching, which is huge. It can't be done alone, and we're not going to attempt to do it alone. We're going to attempt to do it with all of us. So for every person that's on this call, wherever you are, if coaching is a part of you, your voices need to be heard. And so I'm excited about being able to be a part of that work as we really think about how do we build onto the momentum, right, of 2020 and 2021 and not let down, because there's no reason to. We have got to be the facilitators of the change we want to see.
Amazing. And I love that you're aligning with, you know, this work, because the ICF has put forth quite a few statements about really wanting to do the work. And I love to see that they're partnering with some powerful people in this field. So thank you for your work there. Luana.
Yeah, I'm really excited for 22 as well. I'm in the process of cranking out content. And I have heard from a number of coaches, this is content for coach educators first, looking at, we talk about these things, but how do we actually do it, right? What's the how? And so bringing some practical based training solutions, looking at some things that can be integrated as a whole into programs, of course, augmented based on the need. But then I'm building a platform of digital resources for self-directed learning for coaches. We already have the first piece done, and guess what it is? It's trauma-informed coaching. Did that in partnership with Sharon Brown. I don't know if she's on the line. I think she's on sabbatical, but partner with Sharon Brown to do that. So we're going to have digital resources, e-learning, available for self-directed, specific spot education on all things DEI, and that'll be available for coaches on a platform, but then also doing the same after the coach educators and coaches, then doing that for organizations and the HRBPs, business leaders, working through HR departments, all of that. So, but we're going to start with coaches themselves. So really excited for that, and quite a bit of research is on the horizon. Hopefully a couple will be posted or published rather in 2022 as well. So lots of fun.
Oh, that's exciting. And Dion.
I'm going to keep mine quick. I'm going to say +1 to all that Sakina said. So absolutely looking forward to the work with the ICF. IPEC is very involved with them on that, and join that advisory board. And then I'm going to +1 onto what Luana said, because as I'm thinking about the work that I'm doing at IPEC, it's all going to be about the strategic partnerships so that we can do more in this space. And so I'm looking forward to partnering with all of you on some of those strategic partnerships.
I love it. Strategic partnerships is absolutely key. We don't necessarily need to compete against each other. We can build and grow together. Yes, yes. So I'm going to wrap this up because it is the end of the hour, the beginning of the new hour. So I want to be respectful of everyone's time. There are people asking how they can get in touch with each of you. For everyone who signed up for this webinar, you will get the recording. Yay! Yay. And so you'll get the recording, and then we will also get from each of our panelists the contact information that they want to share, so that you'll be able to contact them if you'd like to. So thank you so much to Dr. Sakina, Luana, Dion, so much for being here and sharing your expertise and your experience. Clearly, we're being asked to do this again. So I hope that each of you might be willing to come back and continue this conversation, because we do need to continue to have these conversations. They're so important. So thank you so much to everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, and stay connected. Stay connected.
Thank you.
Thank
so
you,
much.
Dr. Pam, for having us. This was
Yes.
wonderful.
Absolutely.